Expropriation of land without compensation has been given the go-ahead, but only in limited circumstances or instances. The Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture released its report in Pretoria yesterday. The team of experts was appointed last year to advise government on circumstances in which the policy will be implemented and also on the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution. But some groups disagree with the recommendations of the report. But to discuss the issues, we're joined now by Dr. Vuyo Mahlati, the Chairperson of the Advisory Panel. Thank you very much for coming in. We really appreciate your time on this.
Thanks for the invitation.
All right, so let's sort of talk about the process and the methodology that was actually used in compiling this report.
Well, in compiling the report, we had obviously the diverse group of people, which helped because they're coming from, different backgrounds, and collectively it was very, powerful in terms of diverse views and also bringing expertise and experience in different directions. But what we did further was basically to analyze reports, research, as well as pieces of legislation and programs, and we took it further in terms of interrogating or interviewing and engaging government departments, ministers, and we then had a consultative process with members of the public. We had 2 colloquia. We had one in December last year when we were busy sort of framing the agenda in terms of what the issues are from society, and that included civil society, academics, private sector, as well as government officials, and we had experts from outside of South Africa to come and share with us what's happening and basically listen. Yeah. Then we had 10 round tables, and these were basically issue-based and targeting specific groups of people. We had civil society, women's round tables, we had financial institution round table, we had traditional leaders round tables, and on specific topics we had also with parliamentarians. So it was generally different groups where we sit down and discuss specific areas. We had professional groups, we had one on urban land reform. So we sit there and hear people who are engaged and share with them, the views that you are now seeing, and that was this whole intense 6 months where we had hardly time to breathe. I
can imagine. I mean, in fact, to the point that there was actually an extension, because if I'm not mistaken, it was meant to be handed in March to the Interministerial Committee, this particular report. But then you extended, and I can imagine, with what you're telling me, with all of these panels and discussions and negotiations, that's all that was going on behind the scenes.
That was what was going on, yes.
Yeah. So let's, I suppose, talk to a couple of the decisions or issues that have come up in this particular report. You say land expropriation without compensation, and that's the one that a lot of people were waiting for to hear about, is necessary in limited instances. So let's talk to the instances. What are we referring to here?
Well, I think let me first and foremost explain, the background to this whole thing, because the important thing is that our terms of reference didn't ask us to agree or disagree with compensation, Section 25, expropriation without compensation. But what we're requested to do is to look at the conditions for it, to be in terms of being implemented, because Parliament is particularly dealing with that issue. So ours was to specifically focus on those conditions, and basically, so it was not asking whether we agree or disagree, but we had to go into it. So we invited different people who are pro or against and listened to various arguments, and also analyzed different material locally and globally around this, and came to the conclusion that yes, the Constitution currently does refer to just an equitable compensation. But the issue is that that is not enough to deal with some of the cases because it doesn't push to the level of zero compensation. So it came to the conclusion, the analysis, that the Constitution, Section 25 as is compensation based. So if you are having to look into those areas which we believe are the right areas for compensation for expropriation without compensation, one would need for clarity to amend the current constitution. So that's when we got into that.
So what areas are we specifically talking
It's
to?
a whole combination of areas, basically. We looked at abandoned land, underutilized, land that is heavily indebted. We looked at land, for instance, being used by labor tenants, and it's a whole combination of areas that we cited.
Yeah, the reaction, as you've expected, has been far and wide, and many people adding their voices to this. And I know lots of organizations really worried to this and saying that this is, it's just to give you a couple of saying that food security will be compromised if these recommendations do come forward. That's just one response from Agri-SA. I know you're looking sort of, that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. I mean, the point is this is very specific, one. Two, actually, the report, talks about the issue of food systems and food security, actually, and paints a very gloomy picture. Because as much as at one level, there's a disjuncture, it's disjointed, because at one level, we are one of those countries that produce food and has those kind of capabilities. But at another level, we're facing food hunger and food insecurity with millions of South Africans. So I think that the big part of this is actually a push for us to begin to re-look into this whole issue. But we have to be very careful not to unnecessarily scare people, because some of these are necessary, and frankly, the whole push is to manage this very legally, and that is why it is specifically indicating where those areas that we have cited as the possibilities to commence with.
Yeah. Also worries with regard to opening up land grabs. And that's I think, a big concern of a lot of people. So the big difference between changing the constitution, land grabs, you talk to it being done in a legal way. But how do we stop that? How do we prevent something like that from happening?
Can we actually understand that we've had a problem of land grabs for some time now, long before the conversation on expropriation without compensation? And part of it is actually part and parcel of the problem of landlessness and the land hunger that we experience. So that's an issue. But what is important now is to come up with a very strong security system, because what we're having now are people and also criminals who are now, finding space within this whole process, because it is very clear that some of these are organized crime groupings that are finding. So, but generally, it's important that we put into perspective the whole area. And we cannot say, oh, we're going to have that, and you get millions and the majority of South Africans being landless. It is unsustainable. And in a sense, what we need now is really South Africans who have to face the reality of the decisions that we have to make together, because this country has to be stable and grow for everybody. And if we are actually going to use scare tactics and not actually address the reality, it's not going to be nice for everybody. But it is a route we're having to walk, but we have to hold hands, because we are seeing lots of people outside of the system, and it's actually creating more problems for us, and we are having to deal with this reality, and that's all we're calling for.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it wasn't an easy decision to come to, because it was even said that the panel itself had different views on amending the constitution and going in this direction.
I mean, this was not an easy decision, and the good thing about a panel of experts is that you have different people with different views, and we are very strict in managing the process of evidence-based, because you didn't talk about your feeling. You had to actually present evidence, and we had to argue on the basis of that. And it becomes very clear that it's pointing in that direction. And yes, it has serious implications for certain people, but overall, we believe that there is a sensible way of managing this in a way that ensures that we don't destabilize the country and actually move it into a more sustainable trajectory.
Yeah. There's so many issues I need to talk to. We've only got about 2.5 minutes. So
yes.
I want to put two more on the table, though. The issue of a land tax. Well, talk to us a little bit more. Can you give us some more clarity on the recommendation to appoint a land tax inquiry?
Actually, when we came to that, this is a topic that has been there for quite some time. And in the report, we specifically request for a further investigation into this, because we didn't go into much detail in order to offer. But what we are saying is that there's been, a conversation about it. It's been proposed previously, but there has been no action on it. But we're saying that it is not something that you go on willy-nilly on.
And land ceilings?
And land ceilings as well. There's a report that was presented on land ceilings, but it's again important that when we engage in that, because the land is used for diverse, reasons, and from a productive perspective, from a settlement perspective. So it becomes important that when we engage in this, it also aligns with the issue of ownership in terms of foreign land. All those are specific areas that need attention, but we're saying that with the shifts that we are proposing, we need to relook at these in order to be more specific to specific conditions, because now the issue is to look at both urban and rural, because previously focus of land has been mainly on agriculture. So we're saying when we deal with this now, let's look at it within the context.
Finally, that we can get out of you now, and I think the big one that people are looking at and speaking to is the Ingonyama Trust. Talk to us about this, the review of the Ingonyama Trust.
The issue of Ingonyama Trust is actually an area that falls within the conversation around communal tenure. And it is part and parcel of ensuring that there's recognition of communal rights, but the important issue is the management and governance as far as that is concerned, because we're proposing an area-based approach where you have also local boards that operate at that level and ensure that decisions that are made in terms of what is done on land, who benefits and who manages are transparent. And the review is also in terms of aligning with that and recognizing some of the cases and discussions that have been there, and also in court. So we're saying that it is time to review and consult with the appropriate people in order to address this appropriately, and not, there's no hula baloo around it. It is mainly an issue of ensuring that once and for all we address it and address the governance issues that are being raised.
Now that the report is out, what happens next?
What happens next is that read it. We really, really wish that people could read the report, so that when they respond, because it's important for us. I mean, we appreciate even the critiques, but it's the critical thing is implementation. What is important with the report is that we come with immediate action before you engage into legal laws and whatever. What needs to be done now? Government has managed to acquire land from private sector. There's also state land. We're saying, transfer that land to people. Make sure that immediately we deal with almost 2/3 of the people whose rights are not recorded. Let's make sure that we deal with that with the registrar. Let's amend the existing deeds registry, which focuses only on private titling, and ensure that those with communal land are part and parcel of those whose land is registered, so that they can also operate like other people in terms of leveraging their assets.
All right, we'll leave it there for this morning. Thank you very, very much for the clarity on this. Dr. Vuyo Mahlati is the chairperson of the Presidential Expert Advisory Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture, and they report on the expropriation of land without compensation released yesterday. That, of course, is a big story in our news this morning. So let's continue with our news stories, and I'll hand you over to Sakina for more.